It's the When Fishing Podcast. Applying techniques.
Then I put the C rigs on the A rigs.
Bringing fresh ideas.
They can't all be good ones.
Talking stories. Reports.
About 5 knots out of the wind.
Conservation.
You're probably too close.
All to make you and I better fishermen. Hello and welcome to another week of this. Start out with a report, then we'll get into some tweaking, and then we'll get into some other stuff. So, I had all of one trip this past week due to wind and rain and a little car trouble. So, one time I got out was by boat. Under the presumption I was kind of scouting for just about anything. Ended up checking out some new contours and stones, looking for bass and halibut. Pretty tough bite. The water temp was very nice. It was right out of the harbor. It was 60 to 61. Dropped down to maybe 55 in certain spots, which is where it's been since about February. 54 to 56 has been pretty standard. So to see like 60, 61 was impressive. Yeah. So I ended up with only 3 sand bass, but they were like 2 to 3 pounds. The 3-pounder was the same length as the 2-pounders, but the shoulders on it was impeccable. Been hitting the gym. But the weather was pretty good, a lot better than I thought it'd be. So I really thought that the days after that, the forecast was supposed to be pristine the day after, but then like within like 24 hours, it like switched over to like, nah, don't go out, this is gonna be shit. And it was very much that. It was very much shit, so I didn't go. Yeah, then the rest of the week was rain and wind and swells. Oh my. And then yesterday my car had a little hiccup, so it's in the shop now. So I would have gone this morning, I think. But nope. So here I am. But yeah, so that was one little day. There wasn't a whole lot of bait around. There was quite a bit of shit in the water from the rain and all that washing out of the river, the local rivers and harbors and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. It was pretty well chopped up and concentrated in tide lines and stuff like that. And there was some clear water, some dirty water, some very dirty water, but no red tide or nothing like that. Just a little brown stuff here and there. So, yeah. So there was all that. And then I also heard that there was some bluefin tuna, 18 bluefin tuna for 24 anglers on a 3-day trip on the Polaris Supreme. That's some hot fishing, but it's on the plate now. So now I'm sure once the weather gets a little bit more consistent, there'll be more boats going out there. And then I heard that they may or may not be local, so I'll be on my toes. I'll be checking them out in very short order. So then I'll get to test some new ideas. Onwards to the segment of tweaking.
Oh, this guy thinks he's Captain Knots. Thinks he's Captain Tying Knots. When everyone needs some knots tied, they go to him. Bullshit.
So last week, I was talking about dropper loops. I was talking about drop shots. And replacing those with something stronger if need be. Particularly dropper loops, dropper lines. The dropper loop has somewhere in the range of like a 40 to 60% breaking strength, which is not great. I found a few different ideas for what to replace that with. It was recommended by internet pal Tim, shout out, and that about the blood bite knot, which he's been using. And so I looked at it, and I realized that it's basically the same thing as a Seaguar knot, except coming at the knot from different approaches. The Seaguar knot is attaching, basically, it's a mainline to leader knot, and then the blood bite knot is a loop knot in the middle of the line. But if you look at them closely, you'll realize they're the exact same thing, except coming from different approaches of whether you're just doubling over line, or if you're doubling over your main line, or if you're attaching the leader. But it's the same thing, just like what I said twice over just now. So it kind of gave me an epiphany that you could probably, if you have the mind to do so, you could look at some different loop knots, and you could look at some different mainline to leader knots, and it might be possible to use mainline to leader knots and reconceptualize them, because they have 4 ends, and that's basically what you end up with a dropper loop or any similar like middle of the line loop knot. You end up with 4 ends coming out of the knot. So you could potentially turn certain mainline to leader knots and reimagine them into loop knots. I'm sure it'll pose an issue for some, but it seems possible. And you might be able to come out on top with an even stronger loop knot. It's an idea that I had. So I haven't been able to test that. I just know that there are a couple that line up like that now that I've poked around. I know the dropper loop is eerily similar to the surgeon's connecting knot. And then the blood bite too is similar to the Seaguar, and then I'm sure there's some others. But yeah, so there's that. And then in other naughty news, I did some testing on the Palomar as like a drop shot, but also testing the tag end strength, basically seeing if your sinker were to get in a drop shot rig, if your sinker gets caught in on the bottom, like is it going to pop off? Is that tag end from the hook gonna pop off? Is it like compromised if you pull from one end and not the other, as a lot of loop knots will be compromised if you pull from the tag end or the bitter end or whatever you want to call it. If you pull on the tag end of a dropper loop, it's like a 30% strength. If you pull on as opposed to pulling on the loop, you get like 40 to 60%. So if you pull on the tag end of a Palomar, are you getting the same 90% as you are from pulling on the hook that's tied with the Palomar knot, or are you getting less? And you're getting about the same. I tied a San Diego jam to like a sinker, and then Palomar on the hook, and then pulled. And in my various tests, it seemed like the two knots would alternate in breaking, which in my very small, minute abilities with the logical function of my brain, I think you can conclude that they're about the same breaking strength. So the tag end doesn't break, doesn't have a compromised tensile strength. So you could theoretically attach like multiple drop shot hooks to the same rig, or you could add like a dropper line by doing like a Palomar to just a 2-way swivel, and then having a leader off the other end of the swivel, and then you could just avoid 3-way swivels by doing that, and you could have a stronger set of connections by doing that instead of dropper loops. So that's that was my tinkering for the week. And then I also realized while looking at all these knots so I've got two braid to leader connections that I use. One for heavier, like 40 pounds plus, and then I use a FG, and then 40 pounds and under I use now I use some sort of alteration of an Albright. I'll get into that. I was using a uni knot, uni to uni, and I kind of stopped using that because I found that it was bulky in certain circumstances, and then it seemed to fail often enough that I lost confidence in it. I've heard that it's a great knot. I've heard that it's a not so great knot. I've decided for myself that I don't really love it, so I moved on to an improved version of I'm not even going to say it's improved, but a version of the Albright. So my air of uncertainty surrounding this is that I looked at the Albright Special or Albright knot, and then I looked at the Alberto knot, and the Alberto knot is like you make a loop with your nylon leader between your fingers, and then you twist up the loop, and then you twist back down over your previous twists, and then you go back down through the loop with the braid, and then you pull tight. And that, to me, that's like extra steps that I don't want to do. And then like if you're not, you start to worry about passing the braid up and back down like symmetrically. And then if you're doing that in the wind and all that shit, it can be like, what are you doing? So I don't really like that one. And then the Albright, the regular Albright, I must have not just interpreted it correctly. I must have just looked at it once and then didn't like the results of me tying it wrong. Because you're supposed to basically put the braid through the loop, and then you bring the braid up the loop straight, and then you wrap down towards the end of the loop, and then put the end of the braid back down through the loop. And then I found I can't find the source of how I do it now. So I'm not sure if I misinterpreted my source or if it does exist and I'm totally right to do this. But regardless, what I'm doing now is serving me well. So I've validated it through experience, where I go through the loop with the braid, and then I twist up away from the loop of the nylon, and then without twisting back down, I just feed the braid through the loop, and then I feed it through again. I wrap it and pull tight, and that has not really failed me. It failed me once, but other than that, it's been good, and that was on heavier leader. So I'm kind of wondering if it just didn't tighten down correctly, or I ended up tying an FG right after that, so it was definitely heavy enough leader that maybe the bend of the nylon was a little bit too working itself loose. So yeah, with light leaders, this version of my Alberto or of my Albright works really well. Haven't had any issues with light line. So that's my new thing with braid to leader. So yeah, knots. That was nuts. Fish, bluefin, are right-handed. So what I learned on the internet, I found on a podcast that somebody mentioned for a total of 20 seconds on what was it? It was the Sea Bros podcast, and it was the guest. I'm not sure if this was a recent episode or not. I kind of skipped around, but I know I listened to this particular tidbit relatively recently. somebody brought up, like, have you ever noticed, like, that, like, if the fish are oriented one way or another, like left-handed or right-handed, depending on how they get hooked? And the Sea Bros were like, no, we haven't really paid attention to that. Like, do you? And he was like, yeah, I kind of noticed that they're like right-handed. Like, they turn, when they bite, they turn right. And so they end up with the hook in the left corner of the jaw, facing forward, in the port side of the fish. So what's the internet have to say about it? Well, historically, bluefin, left-handed bluefin, were routinely accused of consorting with the devil during the excesses of the Inquisition and the witch hunts of the 15th and 16th centuries. Left-handedness was considered sufficient to identify a fish as a witch and to contribute to their subsequent condemnation and execution. And even in today's left-leaning world, peer pressure may lead left-handed fish to conform to the ways of the right-handed school. So ain't that something? So that was the information I needed for my continued experimentation with circle hooks and putting them onto things that they shouldn't be put onto, including artificials. So I've put some circle hooks where, like, the point, where, like, the open side of the hook is on the left side, so that they can turn, so the fish turns into the hook correctly. And I put it on like a pencil popper, and I put it onto a couple Rapala Magnums, and I put it onto, did I put it onto the high speed trawler yet? I might have, I don't know, but those are the kinds of things that I put it on, like stuff that, like, I know is oriented the same way all the time. I don't know much about, like, trolling feathers and trolling skirts and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if they're, like, always oriented in the same position, or if they, like, slowly, like, twist around in the water or what. So I gotta, I'm not well versed in that, and so we'll have to do some segments on learning about that in the future. So what's next on the menu? What's the game plan? Well, I'll tell you what the game plan is for the week in my neck of the woods. I hope to get my car back from the shop tomorrow, which means Saturday morning. I might fish behind the Long Beach breakwall, maybe. And that's pretty much all I'll be able to do for the next few days if I do get out. That looks like the swell is still a bit sporty, and the tides are relatively nice, at least through the weekend. Well, no. Afternoon, like once you get past 8 a.m., then it's that like slow tide, not really much current. So yeah, I'm not sure what you want to do with that. Then it'll be raining through Wednesday into Thursday with like the swell building, and then it starts to drop off, and then by next week for the ground fish opener, it looks like it'll be nice enough weather to sneak it in the morning on a small boat. Maybe you could do a little bit more damage on the big boats, but the swell won't be bad. Just the afternoon wind will be something to consider. But yeah. So, and then the water temps are probably, looks like they're gonna maybe drop back down a little bit through the week, although they're gonna be warmish through by like Monday, Tuesday. So that's a good sign. Things are warming up. Spring is coming. The tuna will be coming. The thrashers will be coming. And yeah, maybe I'll hit some freshwater stuff. Look for I know I've got a pleco to check off my list somewhere around here, so maybe I'll give that a go. That could be worth worth the gander. And yeah, but this rain and this wind and all that's no good for what we're doing here. No good for a podcast unless we want to talk about knots all day for all 31 minutes of the podcast. But yeah, seems like things are looking up slowly but surely. Is there anything else I want to add? Yeah, there is. I was reading some discussions on El Nino, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, during that 1983 El Nino, there was a tornado in Los Angeles," and I'd never heard of that. So I went and Googled like tornadoes in Los Angeles, and then I saw an article written 12 hours ago, at the time. Tornado strikes down. What do you say? It touchdown in Montebello, which is East LA, and injured 3, thoughts and prayers, and destroyed a bunch of stuff. So that's pretty wild. First of all, the timing of just like, when was the last time there was a tornado? Oh, 12 hours ago. And like the last time one happened in Los Angeles was like 40 years ago or something like that. And almost to the day, perhaps. That's pretty exact, 40 years. But yeah, so apparently an El Nino is projected this year, as they tend. I don't know, there's always a projection for it, but our weather's been silly, and so we might get some warmer water fish this year, and maybe the bluefin in SoCal might disappear. Apparently they showed up when in 2014, 2015 there was a weather bubble that brought the huge biomass of anchovies into Southern California, and those have since stuck around. And so the bluefin have since stuck around, and they've been feeding on the anchovies. So we've had this unusual to us fishery of these bluefin, and so we're all getting used to it. But there is a small, well, I don't know, perhaps a reasonable possibility that an El Nino like this just shoves the bluefin right out of our zone, and then we're left with what we had before. So see what happens through the year. Keep an eye on it. Perhaps we get some cool stuff. Perhaps we lose some cool stuff. Who knows? What do you want? I just started an email account for this podcast. You can email me at whenfishingpodcast@gmail.com, and you can send in discussion points to talk about. You can say, pretty much whatever is relatively appropriate, and there's a good chance at this stage that I'll respond to it and talk about it on the air. So we'll see. That's a fun little thing. I wouldn't mind throwing in an email segment, so that's why I created it. So get on that. And you could also potentially DM me on Instagram, where I'm when fishing with Jeremy Aurora. And you can DM me and say stuff that's relatively appropriate. and I'm fairly responsive, I like to think. I don't got too much else going on. I'm busy. But, see what happens. I like talking shop, obviously. So, yeah. Get on that, and I'll get on it. And together we'll get on to something. So, that's all that. Is there anything else I have to say? We talked about knots. We learned about bluefin. We learned more about bluefin. We learned about the weather. We learned about reports. We learned about the game plan. It's a pretty full show, relatively-ish, right? So, all right. Have a nice week, and good luck out there.